The thing about humans is that they'll befriend anything that holds still long enough. But doesn't hold still. Frankly, it doesn't matter. I once watched a human cargo pilot name her ship's faulty oxygen recycler gurgles and refused to replace it because she'd grown attached. When the Galactic Council first told me, Ambassador Vex of the Rylan Compact, that humanity had made first contact with a Class 5 astrovore, I assumed it was a translation error. A glitch in the universal cipher. Because no species in their right mind looks at a creature that consumes planetary cores and thinks, I wonder if it likes belly rubs. The Rylan Compact had monitored the void between the Scutum Centaurus arm and the Perseus arm for 3,000 cycles. Our deep space listening arrays sang with the usual static. Dying stars, quantum chatter, the occasional scream of a black hole devouring a neutron star. But 13 cycles ago, we heard something new. A hum. Low and steady like a cello string plucked by God. It came from a dark patch of space we'd marked as biologically inert, a graveyard of failed protoplanets and frozen gas. The hum grew louder over the next 10 cycles, and our xenopaleontologists went pale. That hum was a feeding call. A Class 5 astrovore was waking up. We called it Ushilda in our oldest tongue. The World Eater. The Hungry One. In our mythology, it was the thing that ended the previous galactic civilization 80 million cycles ago, leaving behind only shattered planets and fossilized ruins. We had no reason to believe it was real until the hum shifted pitch. Then, the listening arrays picked up something else, a distress signal, weak and garbled from a system we'd never bothered to chart. System Sol 3. The humans called it Earth. I remember the day the Council summoned me. The Hall of Concord was a vast sphere of woven crystal, each facet showing a different star field, and at its center sat the 7 ambassadors of the Compact. I was the youngest, barely 300 cycles old, with soft scales and a voice that still cracked when I got nervous. The matron of the council, an ancient Shalon named Tvesh, fixed me with all 4 of her eyes and said, Ambassador Vex, you are our expert on marginal species. What do you know of humanity? I knew very little. We made first contact with them 40 cycles ago when their first faster-than-light probe crashed into one of our refueling stations. The humans were carbon-based, bipedal, with a bizarre reliance on liquid water and a brain structured around pattern recognition and social bonding. They'd only achieved FTL travel by accident. Some engineer had tripped over a power coupling and fallen into a working prototype, or so the report claimed. Their technology was crude, their politics chaotic, and their lifespan laughably short. 80 standard cycles if they were lucky. We classified them as a type 0.9 civilization, not quite ready for full integration, and mostly ignored them. They are persistent, I said carefully, and social. Dangerously so. They form emotional attachments to inanimate objects, animals, even concepts. It's a liability, but it also makes them remarkably resilient. Tvesh made a sound like grinding stones. That was her version of a sigh. The distress signal we received originated from their home system. It was not a request for aid. It was a warning. The humans have encountered Ushilda. The crystal facets flickered, and a hologram bloomed above the council table. It showed a human vessel, blocky, asymmetrical, covered in what looked like welded scrap. It was tethered to something enormous. Something dark. Ushilda had no fixed shape. It existed as a gravitational anomaly wrapped in a sheath of crystallized space-time. The human ship was attached to it by a dozen flimsy-looking cables, and there was a small airlock on the human hull that had been crudely welded open. As we watched, a human figure in a pressure suit emerged, drifted across the gap, and vanished into the surface of the World Eater. They're attempting direct contact, Tvesh said, and her voice carried the weight of absolute disbelief. Ambassador Vex, you will go to Sol 3. You will find out what in the name of the deep void these primates think they are doing, and you will stop them before they wake it fully. I arrived at Earth's orbit 3 standard days later. My ship, the Quiet Eye, was a sleek diplomatic vessel designed for subtlety. The human system was anything but subtle. They had a space station that looked like a wheel made of garbage, a lunar colony that kept broadcasting reality shows about lunar colony politics, and a Mars base that was currently on fire. I couldn't tell if the fire was intentional or not. The human representative who met me was a woman named Captain Mira Solis. She was tall for her species with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had been broken and healed many times. She wore a patch over one eye. Her file said she'd lost it in a shipboard accident involving a loose wrench and poor life choices, and she shook my clawed hand without flinching. Most species flinched. "Ambassador," she said, her voice raspy. "Welcome to the dumpster fire. I'd offer you a drink, but our synthesizer only makes something that tastes vaguely like regret." I followed her through corridors that smelled of recycled air, burnt coffee, and something else I couldn't identify. Loyalty, maybe. Humans had a smell. It was weird. "The World Eater," I said as we walked. "You've been in contact with it for how long?" 13 cycles. She didn't look back at me. "We picked up its hum on our deep space radio array about 6 years after you guys told us deep space radio was a thing. Most of our scientists said it was a natural phenomenon. But one of them, Dr. Thorne, he said it sounded like a song. So we listened. You listened to a Class 5 astrovore. We sent a probe first. Then a drone. Then a manned mission." She stopped in front of a reinforced door and keyed a code into a panel that looked like it had been installed by a particularly ambitious toaster. "We lost 3 ships before we figured out how to approach it without getting torn apart by tidal forces. But we kept trying, because that's what we do." The door hissed open, and I saw it. Dr. Thorne was sitting in a zero-gravity chair, surrounded by screens and readouts and what looked like a child's drawing of a smiling planet taped to the wall. He was old for a human. White hair, deep wrinkles, hands that trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear and bright and utterly, terrifyingly calm. He was holding a tablet, and on the tablet was a live feed of the World Eater's surface. And on that surface, moving slowly, was a human-made rover. It was painting something on the World Eater's event horizon. A smiley face. "You're painting on it," I said. Dr. Thorne looked up at me and grinned. "She likes it." I turned to Captain Solis. "It's a planet-eating gravitational anomaly. It doesn't like things." "See, that's where you're wrong," Thorne said, and he tapped his tablet. The hum we detected from deep space suddenly filled the room, translated into audio. It was deep and resonant, like a whale singing inside a cathedral. But underneath it, barely audible, was another frequency. Higher, warmer, a rhythm. That's her answering us. We've been sending signals for 13 years. Simple math at first. Then prime numbers. Then music. About 8 cycles ago, she started echoing back. Not just our signals. She started making her own. He played another sound. This one was different. It had chords, harmony, and buried in the harmonics, something that sounded almost like a voice. A single word repeated over and over in a language the humans had taught it. "Friend." I sat down heavily on a storage crate. "You taught a planet eater to say friend." "We didn't teach her," Solis said. "She picked it up. She's curious. About us." That was the moment I should have filed my report, declared the humans insane, and recommended immediate quarantine of the entire system. But I didn't, because the feed from the rover changed. The World Eater's surface rippled, and from the darkness emerged a tendril of crystallized light. It reached out, impossibly slow, impossibly gentle, and touched the rover's hull. Then it pushed. A small object floated up from the surface, a chunk of metallic ore, dense with rare elements. A gift. "She's been doing that for about 5 cycles now," Thorne said quietly. "Whenever we visit, she gives us something. Metals, rare isotopes, once even a fragment of a neutron star's crust. We think she's trying to feed us." "She eats planets," I said. "Why would she feed you?" Thorne looked at me, and his smile faded into something softer, something almost sad. Because we were the first things that ever talked to her without trying to run away. We stayed. We listened. We sang back. For 13 years, Ambassador, she's been alone in the dark between galaxies, and we're the only friend she's ever had. I opened my mouth to argue, to explain the biological impossibility of pack bonding with a gravitational singularity, to cite the 5,000 years of Rylan scholarship on astrovore behavior. But I didn't, because on the screen, the rover had started painting again. A new image. A human figure, holding hands with a shape that looked like a child's drawing of a black hole. And underneath it, in shaky, childlike letters, the World Eater had written its second word. Stay. I stayed on Earth for 3 months. Not because I wanted to. The food was terrible, and the humans had a disturbing habit of crying in public, but because the Council demanded constant updates, and every update made them more panicked. The World Eater was moving. Slowly, inexorably, it was drifting toward the Sol system. Not to consume it. The humans insisted on this. It was coming to visit. You don't understand, I said to Captain Solis one evening, standing on the observation deck of her ship, the last argument. Below us, Earth turned blue and green and utterly oblivious to the cosmic horror drifting toward it. If that thing gets too close, its gravitational field will tear this planet apart. It doesn't matter if it likes you. It's a force of nature. Solis was drinking something brown from a chipped mug. She stared at the planet for a long moment, then said, "We had a thing on old Earth. Wolves. Big predators, pack hunters. They'd eat you if they were hungry, and you were alone. But some of our ancestors, thousands of years ago, they didn't run from the wolves. They sat by their fires. They shared their food. And over time, the wolves stopped seeing them as food and started seeing them as pack." She took a sip. "We domesticated them, turned them into dogs. And dogs will die for you, Ambassador. They'll tear apart anything that threatens you. You can't domesticate a Class 5 astrovore. Watch us." The crisis came 2 weeks later. The Rylan Compact, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that the human experiment had gone on long enough. A fleet of 12 warships, commanded by Admiral Vexcal, no relation, thank the void, arrived in the Sol system with orders to destroy the World Eater. The Admiral was a traditionalist, a believer in the old ways, and he'd brought the largest kinetic weapon the Compact had built in 10,000 cycles. A planet killer. He called it the Final Mercy. I watched from the last argument as the fleet emerged from FTL, their ships sleek and silver and utterly alien against the backdrop of human chaos. Admiral Vexcal hailed me immediately, his scaled face twisted with something between contempt and pity. "Ambassador," he said, "you've been compromised. Step aside. We will handle this." "Admiral, I strongly advise against. The humans have formed an emotional attachment to a predator. It's a psychological disorder. We'll remove the threat, and in a few generations, they'll thank us." He cut the channel. Captain Solis didn't panic. She didn't scream or beg or try to reason with him. She just looked at me, her one good eye steady, and said, "How fast can your people fire that thing?" The Final Mercy uses a gravity driver. It accelerates a tungsten rod to near light speed. From firing to impact, maybe 12 seconds. She nodded. Plenty of time. She opened a ship-wide channel. "All hands, this is the captain. We've got company. They're here to kill our friend. Let's not let them." What happened next was the most insane military operation I have ever witnessed. The humans didn't have warships. They had cargo haulers, mining vessels, and one decommissioned cruise liner that had been converted into a makeshift carrier. They launched them all. 53 ships, cobbled together from scrap, and spite flew directly at the Rylan fleet. They weren't firing weapons, they didn't have any, but they were broadcasting on every frequency. Not threats. Music. The same harmonic frequencies they've been sending to the World Eater for 13 years. What are they doing? Admiral Vexcal demanded over the open channel. "They're calling for help," I said. The Admiral laughed. "From what?" "There's nothing out here, but..." The hum changed. For 13 cycles, the World Eater's feeding call had been a low, steady thrum, like a heartbeat. Now it shifted. It rose in pitch, doubled in speed, and suddenly it wasn't a call anymore. It was a scream, a hunting scream, the kind of sound a predator makes when its pack is threatened. The final mercy fired. The tungsten rod launched from its cradle, accelerating to 0.99 C in the space of a heartbeat. It would reach the World Eater in 11 seconds. But the World Eater was faster. A tendril of crystallized space-time, thousands of kilometers long, lashed out from its surface and caught the rod mid-flight. The rod shattered. The energy of its impact dissipated into the tendril like a stone thrown into deep water. Then the World Eater moved. It didn't drift anymore. It surged forward, its gravitational field twisting and warping, and the Rylan fleet was suddenly caught in a current they couldn't escape. Ships spun, alarms blared, and Admiral Vexcal's voice crackled over the channel, no longer contemptuous but terrified. "What is it doing?" "It's hurting you," Captain Solis said calmly. "Like sheep." The World Eater didn't destroy the fleet. It could have. It could have crushed every ship into a singularity the size of a marble. But it didn't. Instead, it wrapped them in a bubble of warped space-time and pushed them gently, inexorably, toward the outer edge of the system. A warning. A stay back from a creature that had never needed to warn anything before. When it was done, the World Eater settled back into its slow drift toward Earth. But something was different. Its surface, which had always been dark and featureless, now shimmered with faint patterns. Colors. Shapes. I zoomed in on the feed from the human rover and felt my blood run cold. The World Eater was covered in paintings now. Thousands of them. Smiley faces, stick figures, hearts, and crude drawings of planets with little human stick figures standing on them. But there were new images too. Images the humans hadn't painted. Images the World Eater had made itself. A Rylan warship, tiny and fragile, surrounded by a spiral of light. A human hand reaching out. And underneath it all, written in the same shaky, childlike script, a single word repeated over and over across its entire surface. Mine. Captain Solis turned to me, her face unreadable. "You see now," she said quietly, "you don't domesticate a wolf by being afraid of it. You do it by being brave enough to sit by the fire. We sat by the fire for 13 years. And now that thing out there, it's our dog. And nobody messes with our dog." I filed my report that night. It was the longest document I'd ever written, and I deleted it 3 times before I found the right words. In the end, I sent just one sentence to the Rylan Compact. Do not, under any circumstances, threaten the humans again. 5 cycles passed. The World Eater settled into orbit around Jupiter, far enough from Earth to be safe, close enough to be visible as a small dark spot against the gas giant's swirling clouds. The humans built a research station on its surface, or as close to its surface as anything could get, and Dr. Aristhorn, now very old and very frail, spent his remaining cycles there, singing to it and receiving gifts in return. When he died, the World Eater went quiet for 3 days. No paintings, no gifts, just silence. Then, on the 4th day, it sang again. A new song. Sad and slow and beautiful, and buried in the harmonics a single word. Mississippi. The Rylan Compact never officially apologized for the incident, but they quietly reassigned Admiral Vexcal to a listening post in an empty quadrant, and they stopped referring to humans as marginal. Other species started paying attention. The Cthar, a warrior race known for their aggression, sent a diplomatic mission to Earth, and left 3 days later with a new appreciation for human strategic unpredictability. The Xylos, a species of hyper-intelligent gas clouds, tried to analyze human psychology and suffered a collective existential crisis. And the Gorn, who had once considered humans a potential food source, now gave Sol System a wide berth. But the moment that changed everything came in the 8th cycle after the fleet incident. A new threat emerged from the galactic core. The Harvesters. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, but They moved through the galaxy like locusts, stripping entire systems of resources and leaving behind only dead worlds and broken moons. They were older than the Rylan Compact, older than the World Eater, and they had no interest in diplomacy. They consumed. The Harvesters reached the edge of the Sol system in the 9th cycle. The human fleet, still mostly cargo haulers and mining vessels, formed a defensive line near Mars. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they were outgunned, outnumbered, outclassed. But they formed the line anyway, because that's what humans do. Captain Solis, now retired but back on active duty, hailed me one last time. "Ambassador," she said, and her voice was steady. "If this doesn't work, it's been a weird ride." "What doesn't work?" She smiled. "We're going to introduce our dog to the mailman." The Harvesters arrived in force. 100 ships, each one the size of a moon, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. They didn't bother with threats or ultimatums. They just started firing. The human fleet scattered, taking evasive action, buying time. But they weren't trying to win. They were trying to lure. The World Eater had been sleeping, its hum low and drowsy, its paintings faded. But as the first Harvester ship crossed the orbit of Jupiter, something changed. The hum stopped. The paintings went dark. And for one terrible, beautiful moment, the entire Sol system held its breath. Then, the World Eater opened its mouth. I don't have a better way to describe it. The creature that had spent 13 cycles learning to paint smiley faces and say friend and stay and miss, that creature unfolded itself like a flower made of nightmares. Tendrils of crystallized space-time shot out in every direction, faster than light, faster than thought. They wrapped around the lead Harvester ship and pulled. The ship screamed, not a sound but a psychic shriek that made my scales ache. And then it was gone, dragged into the World Eater's surface and consumed. The other Harvester ships tried to flee. They couldn't. The World Eater had been patient for 8 cycles, orbiting Jupiter, waiting, watching, learning. It had mapped every approach vector, every escape route, every weakness in the Harvester's formation. It had been preparing for this moment since the first human rover painted a smiley face on its surface. It ate them all, one by one, methodically, gently even. There was no rage in its movements, no cruelty, just the steady, inevitable hunger of something that had finally found something worth protecting. When it was over, the World Eater drifted back to Jupiter and settled into its old orbit. Its surface rippled, and new paintings appeared. A human ship, a Harvester ship crossed out, and underneath a new word written in shaky, childlike script across the entire visible hemisphere. Home. I stood on the observation deck of the last argument and watched Captain Solis cry. Not from sadness, from something else. Something humans have that the rest of us don't. The ability to love something so completely that it changes the thing itself. The Rylan Compact held an emergency session the next day. The council asked me to give a statement. I stood before the 7 ambassadors in the Great Crystal Hall, and I told them everything. The paintings, the songs, the word friend, and the word stay, and the word mine. I told them about a species so desperate for connection that they looked at a planet-eating monster and saw a friend. I told them about a monster so lonely that it learned to paint. When I finished, Matron Tvesh was silent for a long time. Then, she said, "Ambassador Vex, what is your recommendation?" I thought about Dr. Eris Thorne, singing to the darkness. I thought about Captain Solis, standing her ground against a fleet with nothing but cargo haulers and spite. I thought about the World Eater, riding home across its own skin. My recommendation, I said, is that we leave the humans alone. Not because they're dangerous, but because they've done something we never could. They made the darkness afraid of them. The council voted unanimously. The Sol system was declared a protected zone. Any species that threatened humanity would face the full consequences of the Compact's displeasure. But we all knew the truth. The Compact's displeasure was nothing compared to the World Eater's. And the World Eater was, and would always be, humanity's dog. Years later, long after Captain Solis had died and Dr. Thorne's songs had faded into memory, I returned to Earth one last time. I stood on a hill overlooking a small town, and I watched a group of human children fly kites. One of the kites was shaped like a black circle. A child ran beneath it, laughing, and shouted to her friends, "Look, it's the hungry one. She's smiling today." And far away, orbiting Jupiter, the World Eater painted a new image on its surface. A child's face, laughing. And underneath it, one word: always. The galactic community never truly understood humans. They looked at our fragile bodies, our short lives, our chaotic emotions, and they saw weakness. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest strength was never in their weapons or their technology. It was in their willingness to reach out, to touch the darkness, to sing to the monsters until the monsters sang back. We thought the World Eater was the most dangerous thing in the universe. We were wrong. The most dangerous thing in the universe is a species that looks at a force of nature and decides to love it. Because love for humans is not a weakness. It is a weapon, and they have perfected it. So if you ever find yourself in the dark between galaxies, and you hear a low hum, and you see a faint light drifting toward you, don't run. It might just be the hungry one looking for its pack. And if you see a human standing nearby, smiling at the darkness, run faster. Because the human isn't afraid, and neither is their dog.